Howdy folks, thanks for checking in to MrUlrichPlanetBiology.com. Of course, I am Mr. Ulrich. Now here I would normally have Incubus playing Everything Goes in Circles, but of course, copyright, I can't really go there. But at any rate, this video we're going to be looking into nutrient cycling. We'll talk about 3 cycles, the water cycle, which I'm sure and I hope will be reviewed, and we'll do that one real quick. We'll talk a little more about the carbon and oxygen cycle with a little bit more detail, and then we'll get even more detail into some of the parts of the nitrogen cycle. So we refer to these as nutrient cycles. Really, they're recycles because, for all intents and purposes, the material that we have on the planet is all the material that we as living organisms and all living organisms have ever had to work with on the planet. So there isn't anything that's really new. Everything is really recycled when we talk about atoms and molecules. Case goes for water. You and I, we probably both like to think of our water coming from scenes like this. Even if it does come from a place like this, chances are those molecules that make up those glaciers and that little stream there, well, a few of those molecules came from dinosaurs, were part of dinosaurs, and certainly were tinkled by dinosaurs. If that grosses you out, you also got a few Rasputin tears in there, at least a few atoms, molecules from Rasputin's tears. So it's the same stuff that we've been recycling over and over and over again, so we got to respect it. Alright, the first nutrient cycle that we'll take a look at then is going to be the water cycle. And really, by 10th grade, at this point, really shouldn't have to take a whole lot of time to discuss the water cycle. Certainly the big 3 processes that are involved, the 3 shuns: evaporation, condensation, precipitation, rinse and repeat, always repeat. There are other processes that are going on. Transpiration, which is the evaporation of water from the leaves of plants that allows the transpirational pull to pull more water up into the plant itself, and percolation, as that water kind of dribbles through the spaces between soil and silt and sand particles and rinses material through them. There is important stuff that's going on in the water cycle, but those big 3, those are kind of, that's the gist of it. In its entire trip through the water cycle, water does not actually change that much. It changes phase. It does not change chemically. In these next 2 cycles that we'll talk about, the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle, these elements are going to cycle between organic and inorganic forms. Hopefully you remember that we're talking about organic is carbon with hydrogen, and inorganic is without carbon attached to hydrogen. We can also look at this a little more ecologically rather than chemically. We look at it ecologically, and we're really talking about conversions between biotic forms of carbon and nitrogen and abiotic forms of carbon and nitrogen. So the carbon cycle is one of those cycles where the carbon is going to go from organic to inorganic form. We've actually talked about the carbon cycle quite a bit, just not using the term carbon cycle. Of course, this is, like we said, this is where we're going to take inorganic carbon in the form of carbon dioxide and combine that with water. Now, of course, you and me, we're not going to do this. This is going to be the job of those autotrophs. So the green arrow is representing the carbon dioxide and water being converted over into those organic compounds. And in the process, oxygen is also created. Aerobes, like us and mushrooms and worms and praying mantises, we're going to use those organic compounds and the oxygen as our energy source, and in doing so, through the process of cellular respiration, we convert that back into carbon dioxide and water, which the autotrophs are then going to take and convert from carbon dioxide and water back into the glucose, which they convert into other organic compounds, and we eat them either directly or indirectly for fuel, turn it back into carbon dioxide and water, and the autotrophs go back and forth. Now, please don't forget, there's that little red arrow there going the opposite direction of the green arrow up top. Alright, please remember that plants, algae, bacteria, all organisms, even the autotrophs, are going to go through cellular respiration. So yes, they take the carbon dioxide and water, through photosynthesis convert that into glucose, and then take some of that glucose and turn it right back into carbon dioxide and water. Right, they do this so that they can have the ATP. That's how they convert light into energy. We just borrow some of their chemical intermediates in order to do what we need in order to get the ATP that we need. So the carbon cycle is really the cycling back and forth between photosynthesis, going from abiotic to biotic, and cellular respiration, going from biotic back to abiotic. Alright, the last cycle we'll look at is the nitrogen cycle. And you may be looking at this and going, wait a minute, that's not a cycle. There's too many arrows going all over in crazy directions. There's not just one cycle that goes around. And yeah, the nitrogen cycle does have other forms in it. It does branch. It is not as straight ahead as certainly the water cycle or even the carbon-oxygen cycle. We're not going to get into all of the individual bits of the nitrogen cycle. We'll kind of do an overview of it. One of the things I really want to focus on is the action of bacteria, the importance of bacteria in the nitrogen cycle, particularly these nitrogen-fixing soil bacteria. These are the guys that are going to make atmospheric nitrogen available. Now, before we get into how can nitrogen be available or not so available, let's just look at a little bit more simplified version of the nitrogen cycle. Alright, so nitrogen is in all of us, both plants, animals, all living things. We got enzymes, we have proteins, so we're going to have those nitrogens. Alright, as we excrete our nitrogenous wastes, and as we die, all of those, we as organisms, all of those compounds are degraded in the soil, and eventually are converted by bacteria into ammonium, which is a fancy schmancy way of saying ammonia. It's got extra hydrogen on it. You'll learn more about that next year. That ammonium is usable by some plants. Still some other bacteria will convert some of that ammonium into nitrites and into nitrates. And that's where the plants are really able to use the nitrogen to make more plants, so that the plants have the nitrogen able to make more protein. And then, of course, the animals eat the plant proteins in order to get the nitrogen from them, and the cycle continues. So a little bit more here on nitrogen fixation. Here's the deal. We are surrounded by nitrogen. The atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, but most organisms can't use this elemental form of nitrogen. But we need it. I really hope you can remember why you need it and which biomolecule we're talking about here. Did you get it? Proteins, yeah. Hopefully you remember that each protein is made out of really so many amino acids, and each amino acid has an amine group on the end, and in that amine group is going to be that one nitrogen. And to kind of put this in perspective, if we do a little bit of math here, if each protein is made of hundreds, sometimes even thousands of amino acids, and each cell can have millions of proteins. You are made of, 10 trillion of your own cells? That's more nitrogen than we can really think of. Also, please remember that urination is the way that we get rid of our excess nitrogen that comes from the breakdown of those proteins that we consume. So we know why nitrogen fixation is important, but what the heck is it? Most technically, nitrogen fixation is the conversion of that nitrogen into a biotic form, a form that's biologically active. That's going to be things like ammonia or nitrites or nitrates. These are the things that plants can use. And then, of course, cows can come along and eat the plants. And then we can come along and eat the cows. And all along the way, we're shedding proteins and our nitrogenous waste back into the environment to be used again. Of course, we need to remember what type of organisms do the fixation work. Hopefully you thought of bacteria. Now, bacteria get kind of bum rap, right? People just think of them as germs, right? They're really important, right? Bacteria make our lives, make life, not just ours, but life in general, possible. Not just by being involved in important nutrient cycles, they also make yogurt, and I'm a big fan of yogurt. So without them, not only would we lack fixed nitrogen, but Mr. Ulrich wouldn't have his Greek yogurt to have for lunch. More importantly, to the point, we even have plants that have developed these symbiotic relationships, forming these root nodules. This is a shot of root nodules in a lotus plant. The white bulbs there, those are loaded with nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So these lotus plants have their own fertilizer factories kind of incorporated within them. You can see how that would be kind of handy. Plus, the bacteria are now being protected. They're not going to get eaten by soil grazers because they're living inside of the plant. Everybody wins. Alright, so there's your three nutrient cycles. We'll stop there. Once again, thanks for checking into MrUlrichsLandOfBiology.com. If you have any questions or feedback, or just want to send a note that says, hey, please do so. If you got to this video podcast, through some other alternative route, make sure that you head over to MrUlrichsLandOfBiology.com to get any other supporting documents, notes, sheets, labs, and other stuff. Other than that, see you in class.